So, welcome, Karen. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into frequency work? Because there's a lot of people out there that won't know, if they're new to this, anything about frequency work. Can you just tell us, Karen, how did you get into it?
Well, it sort of found me. That's what I would say. I didn't plan on it. If you'd asked me even 5 years ago, uh, would you imagine that your life would look like this and you're helping people in this way, I would have said no. You must be nuts. So let's see. So my journey into spirituality began with a health crisis that happened in my early 20s. Like many people, for me, my health crisis ended up being, I was in New York City at the time, and we had just moved there from Montreal, Canada, and my husband Chris was working for a law firm, and I was working for an event planning firm at the time. And my body started to respond almost like in an allergic reaction to everything. So I started to have eczema everywhere. So eczema is like a very severe skin rash, and it was so itchy that I would literally scratch off all my skin at night, and then I would wake up and all my clothes would stick to me because there was all this oozing from what I'd scratched off. So it was very painful. And if you've ever had a mosquito bite, like on a knuckle or on the back of a knee, you know how it can kind of drive you a little bit crazy because all you can think about is itching it. Well, I had that everywhere on my body. And so I was in this place of tremendous pain and like psychological and emotional heaviness. And so I was sort of becoming worse and worse mentally, meaning it was getting heavy for me. I wasn't sleeping very much. And I started to, essentially over a period of weeks and months, I started to have darker thoughts of like not being able to sustain. You know, I remember waking up in the middle of one night, just scratching away and thinking to myself, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm not strong enough to do it. And at that moment, that's when I started considering taking my life because I was like, I can't make it stop. And it's not like I wasn't doing anything to try and relieve it. You know, I had gone seen dermatologists and I'd seen different specialists and I'd seen, homeopathy and I'd seen different kinds of acupuncturists and that type of thing. But my skin just got worse and worse. So as fate would have it, I had an aunt who lived all the way out in Calgary, Alberta, which is, for those of you who are not familiar with Canada, it's above the Midwest of the United States. And so essentially she had an acupuncturist who could, quote unquote, see energy, right? He could see life force. He could see what the Chinese call qi. And she credited him with saving her from this very, very severe ovarian cancer that she experienced. And she was the only one in her cancer survival group that had survived. And she credited her survival and her life to him. So she said to me, when I told her about this, I don't know why she happened to call me. We didn't talk that much, but she happened to. And she said, you must stop everything you're doing and go see him. He's the one who can help you. And of course, at that time, I was very, very addled because I hadn't been sleeping. And I thought, well, we can't afford this. And it's, most of the way across a continent. And my husband, Chris, was just beside himself because he's watching his beloved, essentially, degrade, right? He's like, and there's nothing I can do about it. And this is like this slippery slope that's just cascading into this downward spiraling hell. And there's nothing I can do, I'm powerless to stop it. So when he heard about this acupuncturist, I remember I was putting up these arguments like, I don't know that we can afford it, et cetera. And he's like, that's it. It doesn't matter what we have to do. You're leaving, you're quitting your job, and you're going there, okay? And you're going to be seen by him. And so within 5 days of that, I had a one-way ticket, open ticket to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, to go see this acupuncturist. And, I'd seen other acupuncturists. So I wasn't particularly hopeful exactly. I was and I wasn't hopeful. But as soon as I saw him, there was something different about him. And I could tell that he wasn't looking at me like my physicalness. I mean, he was. But I could tell intuitively that he was perceiving something else. And he said, oh, I know exactly what's wrong with you. And don't worry, you'll get better. And it was the first time anyone in this like year-long journey that I'd had that had gotten escalatingly worse said to me, I know exactly what's wrong with you. They were always guessing and I knew it. So anyway, 5 weeks later, after some acupuncture and cupping, totally clear skin, totally healthy, vital, look like the way I do now. Wow. And so that prompted the question, well, what is there beyond the scene that governs what we think is solid and real? There's got to be, because there's no other way to explain these little needles making a significant change from me being a hot suicidal mess to someone being vibrant, vital, and totally different outlook on life. I mean, it's such a radical difference, and it was 5 weeks. So I was like, what is going on here? So that prompted the spiritual journey. And so as fast forward, 25 years of seeking, experimenting with different spiritual modalities that I was called to, experimenting a lot in the personal growth and development field, right? So as mainstream as like Tony Robbins to as out there as Drunvalo Melchizedek, who some of you may know, but Melchizedek, I'm sorry, and lots of people in between. And anyway, I happened to find frequency work at a time where Chris and I at this point had now moved to San Francisco, California, where we had a real estate career. And we had our own little real estate practice. And so we helped people buy and sell homes in a very expensive city. And we noticed that our production, our sales production, kept hitting a ceiling. And we were doing really amazing stuff for our clients, getting them amazing results. And I noticed that other people were not working as hard, didn't really care as much, weren't getting the results, and yet they were doing better. Okay, I'm not saying tons of people were, but some people were, and I didn't understand that disconnect. And the other thing that was driving me was that I always felt scarcity. Even though we had a lot financially, I always felt like I didn't have enough. And if you ever have that feeling, it just kind of gnaws away at you. So I was like, there's something terribly wrong, and I don't know what it is. And it doesn't matter how much I spreadsheet that we're going to be fine. It doesn't matter. The feeling still sucks. Okay?
Yeah. I think Karen, there are a lot of people that could relate to this as well. Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel that same way.
Yeah. So I thought, well, this is kind of messed up because my experience or my feeling about my reality aren't jiving. So something's off, right? And I'd been using all these different modalities and stuff. So anyhow, I had come back from a trip, and my acupuncturist mentioned that she'd seen somebody who did frequency work. And as soon as she mentioned him, I was like, yeah, I need to do that. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that means. I don't know anything other than I know intuitively enough that I need to follow this thread. So, and it's funny because the first time I experienced frequency work, I didn't feel anything. Like a lot of people would imagine that given what I can do now, that like I would have this amazing experience and like, you know, things exploded in bliss and all this stuff. That didn't happen. Nothing happened. Like it didn't feel like anything. I was just like, okay, I feel really centered. That's great. I kind of feel, you know, relaxed. So, but there was something in me that I was like, I can't tell exactly from my normal feeling sense, but I knew in that moment something profound had shifted. I was like, I'm not the same. I don't know how I'm not the same. I don't know what that means yet, but I'd been in my journey long enough that I knew something fundamental had shifted. So there was something in me that I was like, there's something about this idea or this feeling that I have of when these things that I call distortion patterns are released at the level at which frequency work works, that it starts to shift something. And the more that I released in my own work, you know, my own personal journey, I had no aspiration to do what I do now, by the way. I was just trying to clear my own stuff so that I wouldn't feel like desperately impoverished, even though we had a lot. So I was just clearing it. And as that happened, it started to accelerate. I was like, whoa, change is really speeding up. This is getting kind of crazy. And so I noticed that I wouldn't be triggered by the same things anymore. I didn't feel that same sense of scarcity. I wasn't chasing things in the same way I used to. I wasn't stressed out all the time. I wasn't spreadsheeting all the time. You know what I mean? Like I just noticed my behavior starting to change because what was a concern for me internally wasn't the same as a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 4 months ago. Somehow I was internally shifting very quickly to a very different person. And then after that, what happened was at some point about 2 years in, because I'm kind of the way I'm wired, I enjoy learning how things work, and I like things that are efficient. So, they talk about like life hacks and all that sort of stuff. I find that stuff fascinating. I'm like, wow, life hacks, that's like amazing. You can like shortcut stuff, and you know what I mean? Like you can learn how you are as a person and how you're wired, and you can learn how to do things better. And I'm like, well, that's fascinating to me. So in this process, it felt like a life hack. I was like, I am seriously changing so fast who I am. It's incredible to me. So I started to feel very centered in myself, very solid, very whole. Like I said, I didn't feel like I needed to chase anything. And my intuition just started to get sharper, and I could read things about people. I'd always been sort of intuitive, but I was like really clearly, I was like, oh, his grandfather used to smoke exactly like that. You know what I mean? And I can, I can almost see the shadow of the grandfather, like things like this, which I never could do before. And I never did anything with it, but it was just sort of like, and I didn't chase it. It was just something that started to happen. Anyway, so I ended up going to 2 years into this process, a very intensive, what I would call my own journey with frequency work. I'd cleared enough my distortion patterns that I ended up going to a meditation retreat in Sedona, Arizona, from somebody who wasn't doing frequency work at all. And I thought I was going for this workshop and I think the workshop was about, what is it? It was about piercing the absolute. Okay. And to me, that I would translate that. I don't know what the workshop leader would call it, but I would call it merging back into the oneness. So that was what the workshop was supposed to be for. And it was a 12-day workshop. So for somebody who is very busy in their work life and whatever, I was like, this is a really long, bloody workshop, right? It better be really good. And I don't know, it seems really expensive, but there's something in me that knew I had to go. That first day, Jessica, I get in that room and I can feel the field. Like, again, I don't have any abilities yet, but I'm intuitive enough and enough clear of my own distortions. I'm like, whoa, this field is unstable. It's like wobbly. There's a lot of thought forms, a lot of posturing, a lot of like, I'm right. And I was just like, whoa, there's a lot of instability, a lot of polarity in the field, a lot of mind chatter. And I was like, okay. So I was there for like, a couple hours. This is intro talk. And as soon as I was in there, I was like, I don't need to be in this workshop. The field's too unstable. Now, you have to remember that my thing before was scarcity, right? So I've just paid to come to Arizona. I've paid for 2 weeks of a workshop. I've paid for an Airbnb. I paid for all this stuff. So as a good Chinese person, I'm supposed to sit there, take notes, and get the most out of the workshop. That is the prerogative, like you're supposed to abide by as a Chinese person. However, I realized in that moment, I was like, I'm not supposed to be here for this. Like, that was the invitation to be there, but yes. I wasn't there to be at the workshop, which sounds kind of crazy potentially to somebody, but I knew enough that something wasn't right. So I ended up meditating on my own. And it's funny because 3 days in, I go back for one session because I was like, something's weird. I don't really want to go back to the workshop, but something keeps nudging me to go. So it ends up that the teacher is about like half an hour late or 45 minutes late, which he never had been. He's very punctual, actually. And he announces that one of their close friends has died suddenly. And he's not going to actually teach what he's trying to teach because the field's too unstable. And I'd already picked up on that at the beginning. So I knew that my why was there was to do what it is that he was purporting, which is to merge back into the one, but in my way. I didn't know what the heck that meant, to be perfectly honest. I just knew that my butt had to be there in that little studio in Sedona, and I was going to meditate, and I didn't expect anything. But what happened was eventually on like some day, I don't remember, it ended up being a 9-hour meditation where I experienced what I would call an ego death, right? So I experienced a near death without experiencing a near death. So I went through the layers of consciousness up into, a merged oneness experience from my perspective. At that moment, I realized that everything was frequency because that's how I perceived in that moment. I was like, whoa, everything's vibrating, which I'd heard before. I mean, it's not a new concept that everything is vibrating, but like I really, really, really knew that everything is vibrating. Everything is new. And I also knew that everything is one. I was like, you what? And it wasn't a thinking, it was a knowing, right? And I remember in that meditation that in my physical body, I started laughing because I couldn't believe that I'd forgotten that we were one. I was just like laughing and like how do you forget that your hand is part of your body? I mean, it's not possible, but it happens. And then all of a sudden I started crying because I couldn't, the grief of having forgotten, so I'm sure from the outside it looked completely nutty, but anyway, that was my experience. And when I came back, after that 9-hour meditation, I looked at the clock and I was like, wow, it's been a long time. I just sat there that whole time meditating. And when I came back, everything had changed because I could see the illusion. I would go on these walks, like Sedona is a magical place. So I'd go on these walks with these spectacular views, and it would be like I could put my hand through the one, the illusion. I was like, whoa, that's not real, but that's fascinating. And look how complex and amazing and magnificent that is, and perfectly timed. It's a miracle. And, and I could feel and I could perceive everything as frequency still. I was like, whoa, everything's still frequencies. So, yeah. So
you really got to understand frequencies and experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to be short. Sorry.
I love it, Karen. I absolutely love that. And I'm sure there are people listening that will be thinking, I want that experience. I want to be able to experience that.
Yeah.
And obviously you then experienced all of that. And so what was the next step? So you suddenly realized you could see all these frequencies and what some might call the illusion for what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know, it's funny. There's this, I don't remember what the saying is, but it's like, what is it? Like chop wood, make fire, like wash dishes, sweep floor. Right. And then after waking, like chop wood, sweep dishes, wash, clean floor or whatever. It's the same. It doesn't really change that much. It's just that you have a different perspective. And for me, I think what changed was first, I stopped seeking. So I'd been seeking very hard for 25 years. So I was like, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? And then all of a sudden, in that experience, I was like, you don't have to seek because everything is part of the one and there are no secrets in the one. So whenever you need the answer, it's just there. And I don't know how I knew that, but I did. And I also realized that I could not only perceive frequencies, but I could shift them, right, in myself and in people. And then it so happened that a friend who I hadn't seen for a long time happened to be in Sedona, and we overlapped by 8 hours. We were 8 hours overlapping in Sedona. It was like the weirdest timing. She's there. She happens to come for a visit. And she was the first person I started to work on because she asked me to. She was just like, you're different. And I said, yeah, I feel different. And she's like, well, here's what my challenge is. Can you help me with that? And I said, sure. And so I did. And what happened was she started telling her friends. She's like, oh my God, everything just changed. So she just started telling everybody that she knew. And then all of a sudden people started calling me to work on them. I didn't have any, I didn't advertise. I didn't try. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't like out there with a little shingle being like, hi, I'm a frequency worker now. That's not what happened at all. It was higher self and spirit being like, all right, you're meant to help and begin. So
I think, Karen, what you're describing there is anybody that's had that kind of experience of that oneness, and obviously there are many ways to get there, aren't there? There's many journeys, and each person's got their own. But once I think you've had that experience, you really do see life very, very differently. And that's exactly what you're describing. So how amazing that you overlapped with your friend, started the frequency work. And then that's another thing, isn't it? When the synchronicities, we could call it that, or the gifts or the flow just start happening without even trying. So as you said, when you started, I didn't even, it just when it came into it. So it wasn't planned. You were just wanting to sort out your own what we call issues, I guess. And there you are now. So how long have you been working with clients? And can you give us an example? So there's two questions here. So one is how long have you, from that day? And for people that, as I said, maybe don't have any understanding at all of, their issue and how they could clear that. Can you give any idea about what someone can expect, really?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So for me, my Abilities came in December of 2017, I believe that was. And since my friends saw me like a couple days after that, I've been helping people since then because they just started asking me to, really, and having amazing results, and they would just start sharing, right? So people started calling me or emailing me asking me to help them. So that's when I began. Who I am now compared to then has shifted up quite a lot. And I think I'm going to back up to answer your question, just to give people some framework or context for what I'm talking about. So as you and I mentioned, like everything is vibrating. So it's not like a new concept. Everything is vibrating, even things that look solid. The rate of vibration may be slower for things that are solid than things that are less solid, but they're still vibrating. So if you imagine water, for example, right? So as steam, the molecules vibrate faster, so it's more gaseous. And as that vibration slows down, it becomes liquid water. And as that slows down even more, it becomes ice, it becomes dense, solid. So if you imagine that, but on a much more exponential scale, okay? So you have the solid all the way up to consciousness and beyond that to pure source, okay? Or source, or the one, or the divine, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. But that very high vibrating consciousness from which everything derives and to which everything returns, okay? So on that spectrum, at the very high end is what I'm going to call pure source. Okay, so pure source, that level is, like I said, vibrating very, very, very high in resonance. We can't even measure it. That's how high it is. It's beyond the physical in terms of our the speed of its vibrational level. So in order for, from my perspective, in order for the oneness to have form, or the oneness to experience embodiment, there needs to be a drop in vibrational level. So the vibration level drops, and you have something called frequencies that happen. As soon as the vibrational level of that drops some more, it becomes energy. And as that vibrational level drops some more, you have what I call physical form. So from my perspective, everything starts at the frequency level or at spirit level first. Your physical body, your physical, what I would call rendering, mirrors what exists first at frequency level. So you can run around trying to change things in your life on the physical level, you know, and people do all the time. So for example, you know, for me, there was a challenge with scarcity, right? So you try and like go to the personal development classes, you go to get coaching, you go to therapy, you go to meditation, a whole bunch of different things. But if you don't change things at the frequency level, the physical doesn't reorganize. So for example, if you take a more extreme example of what I experienced, so if you take like a lottery winner, okay? So you have people who are working class people and they win like, I don't know, some tremendous amount of money, like, I don't know, $30 million or something like this, right? In the lottery. And yet, and you know, a lot of people, you could take that and for a whole lifetime not spend that much money. I mean, it's a lot, it's still quite a bit of money, even after tax, yes? Okay, but yet, for some of these people, within a couple of years, we always hear these stories of people who have nothing left. They're actually more broke than when they won the lottery. Now, why is that? Are they all just poor money managers? Are they all calling the same financial advisor? No, right? They're running what I call distortion patterns of scarcity. So it doesn't really matter how much money comes in. They're just, those patterns are going to be there and they're going to lose that money. So my point is, what exists on frequency level dictates the physical reality that you experience. So from my perspective, when you do frequency work, the reorganization that can happen in your physical life can be very, very fast. And it's more, let's call it permanent, because you're getting to the root of the issue, which is at the frequency level. So once you make the shift at the frequency level and you release what I call distortion patterns, or these you know, blocks that keep you in a certain rut or a certain stuckness, once you release those at the frequency level, you don't experience them anymore because they're not there. So you're changing the blueprint that is you on the level at which your physical renders, meaning mirrors or embodies. So that to me is what frequency work is. I'm sure a lot of people would talk about it differently, but that's the work that I do.
It's very well explained, Karen, and I do love that, you know, because as you say, we can try, can't we? Work harder, and that ethic is sort of like drummed into most of us somewhere along the line. And as you say, it gets you get to a point of feeling very hopeless and very desperate, when you put all your effort, energy, positive thinking, and everything else, and nothing particularly changes, as you say in your example of a lottery winner. Is it just bad luck? No, I don't think it is more than, no, certainly not. So I love the fact that there is something that, the way that you've been describing it, and just around that is, why do you think this is happening at this time? I mean, obviously you've done you've done the hard work, and I'm just wondering, because it does seem to be, many more people becoming aware of, as you say, the different frequencies and densities and how it works. And so, explain to me what you think about how, and why it's happening now, really.
Sure. So, from my perspective, we are the embodiment of consciousness. Consciousness at this particular, and this might be a little bit out there for some of you, so if you don't understand it, yeah, exactly. Just be in the resonance of my words. Okay, so right now, and this has been predicted for a long time. So even in the 60s, we were talking about the age of Aquarius. The Mayans have been predicting this time when there would be a shift in consciousness. The Hopis, the Navajo, like all of these indigenous peoples have been saying, hey, people, by the way, there's this thing that's going to happen where consciousness is going to jump. So we are in this window right now where consciousness is rising. So what does that mean? So remember when I talked about vibration and everything being vibrating? Okay, so you as a being and are a reflection of the consciousness level of a certain vibrational level, yes? So you have the opportunity to move up exponentially in your vibrational rate. Why do you care about this? You care about this because it's a jump in consciousness level, which means that what you perceive to be possible, what you perceive to be limitation, how fast you create manifest, what you feel in terms of your experience of yourself as embodied and separate versus part of the one, all of that changes when consciousness rises. Okay, so when the vibrational level of consciousness is higher, our experience of our, let's call it lives, our embodiment shifts. So we are in this window of time that has been predicted for a long period of time, where there are basically these waves of very high resonating frequencies that are pushing through all levels of consciousness. This is my perception. I'm not saying it's necessarily true for everybody. I'm saying this is my perception. So it is pushing through all levels of consciousness at all dimensional levels. It happens every once in a while. And in this period of time, all beings at all dimensional planes, all space-time realities have the opportunity, if they choose, to jump into a new higher level order of consciousness. So it's a window. It's not like it's open in their perpetuity, and no one's being forced. Okay, so it's through your free will. If you want to jump in your resonance, then you certainly can. If you don't want to, you certainly don't have to. So that is what's being made available at this time. Because consciousness is rising at the rate that it is, there are more and more people who, like myself, I'm not the only one, who are helping in different ways, because consciousness has risen enough. We've cleared our own density, our own distortion, that we can perceive in a different way to help to accelerate people to move up in their own consciousness level. And my feeling is that as we move into this new consciousness level, it's really about the people, the helpers who are helping people to help themselves. Does that make sense? It's no longer the old, to me, part of the old paradigm. So just to make it really clear, what's the old consciousness and what's the new consciousness? What does that even mean? So to me, the old consciousness is heavy with certain distortion patterns like fear and greed and abuse and oppression and dominance and a whole bunch of scarcity and a whole bunch of heavy distortion patterns that make us less than, that diminish us, that make us feel like we're not enough. Okay. In that older consciousness, it's interesting to me, this happened a lot in even the teachers that I was following. There's an assumption in the seeker that we're not enough, that we're missing something, that we need to be healed, we need to be worthy, we need to like meditate more. You know what I mean? Like there's something wrong with us. And at some point, some guru person is going to wave their wand over you and you're going to be awake. And then, angels will sing, right? And you'll be awakened, right? But that's the old consciousness. Part of the new consciousness is about self-empowerment. How accountable are you to your own awakening? What tools can help you? What are the people who can guide you so that you can raise your own frequency resonance yourself? Because it's no longer like, I'm powerless, I can't do anything to help me. And I'm not suggesting that suffering is easy. Okay, I didn't say that. But at some point we realize, wait a minute, there is something in me that is divine. So I need help. Okay, so it's okay to need help, but that you yourself have the ability to raise your own frequency resonance when given the right tools and the right guides. And yes, you can raise yourself. Do you see what I'm saying? It's no longer this weird power dynamic where we're less than the guru. It's not the case at all, right? I'm not saying that you can't be guided, that you can't be helped, that you can't be catalyzed in some way. And you are not less than, okay? There's this weird base assumption in the old consciousness that we were less than. That is not true, right? So part of the new consciousness is about, okay, I'm not less than. I could use some help, but I'm not less than. So there's a self-empowerment that's important and which is coming through even more at this time to break away from the non-deserving of the old consciousness.
I love that, how you've explained all of that. That's amazing. It really is. And it's very exciting, the thought of it. Now, some people might actually say, well, what about my partner? Or what about my friend? Or what about, I want them to be empowered and I want them to come along with me. And I think that's, that's, what would you say about that? Because,
of course,
about self-empowerment.
Yeah, totally. Because people worry about that. They ask me all the time, like, what about my dog? What about my child? What about my auntie, my friend, my whatever? Okay, so here's what I'm going to suggest. All right. So we have heard this idea, or some of us have heard this idea, that we co-create our reality. You actually have the authority and the sovereignty to create your reality. You do, especially as your frequency resonance starts to rise, you realize you actually create everything. And that everything is an aspect of you to learn from. Okay, so I'm probably going to say something that's a little controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. So as much as you are loving and wanting very much for the people that you love to come with you, you cannot force someone to awaken. As much as you love them, it is on their time. It's for them to recognize within themselves this moment where you're like, something needs to be different. Something in me is starting to shift. I don't know what that means. Or something isn't working and there needs to be a new way. That is a very private moment that's sacred between you and your higher self. There's no one else who can force someone to awaken. It's just not within your power because, first of all, it's not within... To have that much control over someone, you have to ask yourself, why are you trying to control them? Okay, like what are you afraid of by them not coming with you? That would be a good question to ask. But to recognize that by clarifying yourself and raising your own frequency resonance, you can potentially inspire them to shift. Your own frequency resonance being higher will allow them to entrain or move up in their frequency resonance to come with you. Okay, and at some point, they may be like, oh, wait a minute. Something feels different. And I kind of want to do more of this on my own. So just a little example of this, right? So, my husband, Chris, and I started on our path first. Like we were the ones very interested in spirituality and looking at all these different modalities and stuff. And then my parents back in 2004 moved to California from Montreal, Canada. And they started following us in our crazy California journey, like all these different modalities. They're in their 70s and 80s and they're out there in ice baths, doing breath work, doing all this crazy stuff. The oldest one's there, but they caught totally into it, right? They're just like, they were doing all this interesting stuff. They started doing frequency work. They had tons of change. And then they were very concerned about my sister. And they'd have they would come to dinner and they'd sit there and they'd be like, we need to do something about Vanessa. She needs to meditate. And they're very concerned about my sister and her journey. And I was like, Mom, Dad, like Vanessa is on her own path. So I know you're concerned about her, but there's no like intervention scenario here where she is going to be compelled to awaken. Okay. You have to respect her timing. So as much as we love the people that we love, their timing is their own. And part of what we learn is in the co-creating of our reality, to be able to hold our space and not control another being. It's actually very important lesson to learn. Okay, because I know that we control people we love because we love them. We think we know the best for them, right? That's usually how it shows up. And right, you have to ask yourself, why am I trying to make them conform to what I think is correct?
Yes. It's a really good point, because I think a lot of this, as you call it, past distortions, that the old paradigm very much is the way that people operate. I'm not saying everyone, but certainly myself. I know when I look back on my past, I think, yes, I used to want to, save the world, help everybody. Everybody's got to kind of come along, and I know best, but I don't mean an ego way, but more in a sort of like, I want to help you way. And that point, isn't there, Karen, where you just drop it and you actually realize, as you said, so many things, that you're the creator of your own reality, that every experience that you have is your choice. And I think what's really lovely is when you, because what I'm thinking here is there's a lot of people that could be really scared about that. As I said, I'm married, I might lose my friends, a bit wacky, a bit out there, as you say, with what you were saying about your parents, So, how do we guide people to allow their journey to unfold at the right time? I mean, there's obviously something that happens. It did for you, didn't it? There was that trigger point. It was like the pain got so severe, I guess, that you were probably ready to try anything. I would think you tried so many things.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people's beginning into a spiritual journey happens because there's some kind of pretty severe breakdown, right? So it looks like a health crisis, or like a financial crisis, or a relationship crisis, like something goes to hell in a handbasket, basically, right? It's shake, or a death, or a sickness, or something like this, right? Which is very fundamental. And it breaks your, the way your world construct has been. Like, it shakes your reality, and it's not in a good way. And it's to the point where, for many people, you surrender, right? You get to a point they're just like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know. I don't know. And so in that I don't know, we surrender, actually. So in that surrender, it's funny, when we get, that's when we, there's this term, we get out of your own way. That's when that happens, where when you surrender, the ego mind, what you think is correct, what you think is true, what you believe to be, the limitations, the should-bes, the conclusions, the beliefs, all that sort of pitches out the window, because you realize none of that's freaking served me right now. None of that's working. All right, really, something else has got to happen here. And in that moment, there can be a tremendous shift. For some people, it's like an instantaneous awakening, right? This is like the Eckhart Tolle thing, where he had that moment where he like flashed into awakening. Now, for most of us, we don't instantly awaken on, right? I mean, that's not typically how people have that experience. However, to answer your question more directly of like, how do we let go? Well, for me, or at least from my perspective, I would say it's to release your distortions. The things within you, the control patterns within you, the fear within you, all of these things are what I call distortion patterns. So what are distortion patterns? So from my perspective, a distortion pattern is simply something that keeps you separate from the one. Okay, keeps you from merging back to the one. So your physicalness is a distortion pattern. Now, I know in our language, distortion sounds negative. It's not meant to. It's just this thing that interferes with the clarity of your relationship with the one, or pure source, or source, whatever you want to call it. I'm just calling this anonymously. Okay, so in addition to the physicalness that is you, distortion patterns are things that keep you from, like I said, interacting with the oneness or your reality in a way that's clear. So meaning, what happens from my perspective is that when we come into embodiment, okay, so here we are, disembodied between lifetimes, And then we drop into embodiment, okay? Either for the first time or between lifetimes. It really doesn't matter. To me, what happens is in that embodiment process, let's call it that, you are this sphere of pure source energy that drops into embodiment. In that moment, there are layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of what, to me, look like duct tape. And they glom on or around the sphere. So if you've ever seen duct tape balls, they're pretty heavy. You can't see through them, and they're dense, and they're sticky. Well, if you can imagine that sphere of pure source energy, which is within that ball of duct tape, it now is vibrating, because it's vibrating at its own unique rate, by the way, but its vibration slows down because it's bogged down by all these gooey, gross layers of duct tape. And it also forgets that it's infinitely connected to pure source in all directions around it, because the duct tape's there. So it totally doesn't understand that it's connected. So the duct tape analogy is a metaphor for what I call distortion patterns. Distortion patterns are things like what I call lineage patterns. So what your parents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, all of those people had experiences. They pass those experiences down to you on frequency level. Okay, so they're doing now, it's interesting, the field of epigenetics is showing that like what your great-grandparents or grandparents experienced in their lifetimes imprints into your DNA and informs which genes express and what choices that you make. So science is starting to catch up to this idea on spirit level. So what your ancestors experienced very much influence you. Another form of distortion would be like a cultural distortion pattern or religious distortion patterns. So even if you personally aren't religious, right? You never grew up with religion in your home, you're a-religious. So in your lineage, in your ancestry, I can guarantee you that they were impacted by religion. So it impacts you because it's running through you. You carry the same frequencies that are unresolved many times from your lineage, from culture, from religion, past lifetimes, and then of course your own wounding. So all of these distortion patterns are there. And if you release them at the frequency level, your experience starts to clarify. Because imagine this, right? There are all these layers of duct tape. So imagine like all these layers of duct tape between you and the illusion, okay? The reality. So it's like you're looking through all these lenses that are distorting what you see at the end. But as you remove the filters, you're like, oh my gosh, I totally thought that what I was looking at was like kind of warbly and short and blurry and kind of like fat. But actually, that's not what it looks like at all. It's like clear and beautiful and a different color entirely. Do you see what I'm saying? Like your perception of like what you view as your reality starts to change. So all of that shifts. So when you release your distortion patterns of things like control, fear, wanting someone to come along with you, all that stuff, everything starts to change because who you are changes. Does that make sense? The filters through which you see the reality and yourself completely shifts. So no longer are you trying to get them to come along. You realize in yourself that you're whole and complete. And if they join you, that would be amazing. And if they don't, it's totally okay. And it's not like you're putting on rose-colored glasses, pretending everything is like amazing when it's not. You actually feel that way. You're like,
the rose-colored glasses were there before. That was, or as some people call them. I mean, and you know, I love the way that you're putting it with the duct tape. That's absolutely brilliant, Karen, because it literally is like that, isn't it? It's like, or having a pair of glasses that belong to someone else, and you put them on, and it's all distorted, and they're filthy. It's just, and when you take them off, it's just that feeling of liberation and fulfillment and freedom from those patterns, and it's amazing. Now, I'm sure everybody in their own way are, you know, doing their best to clear these distortions, and you know, of course, as you say, if we're looking at working hard or the problem, keep focusing on the problem or trying to be positive about it, those are all great tools as well. Because once you get to that clear those distortions, some of those tools are absolutely amazing, aren't they? To be able to use, you just suddenly think more positively. you express yourself more positively, your life experience attracts all those things that you have been chasing after. They're just suddenly there, or like you say, they do. I think you were giving an example earlier where things just sort of happen to coincide, and it's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So people that would, have got no experience whatsoever, perhaps are not even, that, I mean, you use the word awakening as well, and I think that's when you were describing the time that we're in right now, and why the frequency, yourself, the frequency workers are doing what they're doing. What would you say to somebody who has got no idea about it, and what they might expect if they were, say, having a session with you, Karen? Is it an online session? Do you work online?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What would be the first point? I mean, I'm going to pop it up here. Actually, I've got your. I think I've got this correct. Spiritual.
Yes.
Luminosity.com is your website where people can find you. And I know you've got YouTube channels, and I'm sure you're on Instagram, and I guess it's all under the same name, is it?
Yeah. So here's what I would suggest. It's funny. I would say the best way to start is actually to watch some of my free vlog podcasts. Okay, it comes out at least once every 2 weeks. It's regular. Okay, so if you come onto our newsletter list, you basically get access to a new paradigm meditation every week. And for the vlog, it would look like a specific topic. Like, for example, you asked about how do you not want to control the other person or be in fear or want them to come with you. So my answer with that would be to hold your space. But you wouldn't understand what I meant. But if you watch episode 122, Steady She Goes, Hold Your Space, you would know exactly what I meant. So what I would suggest actually is to look at the vlog and the podcast, just to get your sense of well, what is it that I'm curious about? And I would start with episodes 1 and 2 so that you can understand how frequency work works. And then just go through. We have over 160 episodes at this point, so that's a lot. But you can go through the different topics and see what it is that interests you. So at the end, here's the thing that's the most important. At the end of every vlog and podcast, or on my YouTube lives, which is the other thing that you might get weekly instead of a vlog, I give what I call a group frequency calibration, which is really a meditation with frequency work in it. Okay, so it's not just a meditation, there's actually work being done to you or with you, I guess is a better way of saying it. And as I just want to mention this because, it's really funny. There's so much emphasis on the individual. I want an individual session. Part of the new paradigm is to actually harness the mastermind, to actually use the momentum of a group to catalyze you up in your frequency resonance. Because it's funny, with these group frequency calibrations, it may be on something like, for example, I don't know, fear of scarcity, or procrastination, or I don't know, something on eating, right? And being out of control with your eating. And you'd be surprised when you join a mastermind, it's not accidental who you're masterminding with. And it happens in the beyond space and time. So it doesn't matter when the actual work was given. You're being pulled into that space-time resonance as if you were being there live. So in that moment, the focus is everyone's higher self is there with the intention of clarifying their awareness of their connection to source and releasing those distortion patterns. And you would be surprised how many people write in saying, I felt like you were talking to me. Yeah. Because I am talking to you. You're part of this mastermind. We are in a collective. We are one. So that is how the group frequency calibration works, on that principle of oneness. So it seems like it's on you, right? Your stuff about the whatever and the whatever distortion that's slowing you down, you release it and all that good stuff. And it's happening together. And so there's so much momentum that happens from what I call these group frequency calibrations. So I'd start with getting on our newsletter and watching the vlog or podcast for free, and or watching YouTube live. If you want to go deeper, there's always group frequency calibrations or deep dives, which is a series of 3 where you can go deeper. And You can always ask info@sphericalluminosity.com, like, where should I start? There's actually a where to start page on our website. So if you're not sure where to begin, I would go there. And if you feel like you would like some fine tuning, something specific to you that you need help with, then have an individual frequency session, because those are really helpful. I'm not saying they're not powerful. They are very powerful, and they're specific, and they'll give you refinement. But the momentum really comes from the group work. It's very the paradigm in which we work is changing, just like you, Jessica. It's like it's not the old anymore. We're moving into this new paradigm. So the group frequency calibrations are really, whether you're aware of it or not, recognizing that you are part of the one. And so that is how those group frequency calibrations work. So I would start there. And the podcasts and vlogs, the Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, which you can find on our website or on YouTube, free. The YouTube lives are free. So there's a lot of free to begin with that you can sort of get your feet wet and just figure out how things work. And then if you feel like, okay, yeah, I need some fine tuning, yeah, then for sure, sign up for an IFC.
Yeah, there's
individual frequency calibration. Sorry, that's the way I call it, individual session. An IFC is an individual frequency calibration. Sorry.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for clarifying that. And everything else. I mean, it's great to know that you've got so much material out there. I certainly have seen a lot of your stuff coming through with your newsletters, and think, wow, you're really open to helping so many people. And it's just fantastic at this time. As I say, so many people are going through so many changes. Karen, thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved it. Absolute pleasure.
And, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. And sphericalluminosity.com, Karen Cheong, you can find there.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and all of you. Bye for now.